Welcome to the All Hail the Fail podcast, the podcast that celebrates messing up spectacularly, embarrassing yourself repeatedly, and failing forward. I'm your host, Zhe He, executive consultant, coach, author, and proud of every failure and rejection it took to get me here. Today, I have a very special guest, Zhe He, who happens to be my best friend, which is an interesting complication, given that the first question that I ask is, if your best friend was introducing you at a conference, what would they say? So I will now proceed to tell her what I would say if I was introducing her at a conference. Zhe He has had a prestigious career as an auditor, investment banking analyst, and most recently as a fintech platform payment leader at Gusto and Airbnb. She's a qualified chartered accountant and angel investor with a passion for social justice, amplifying underrepresented voices, and the arts. She's also kind of a shark with a wicked sense of humor and exemplifies the saying, dynamite comes in small packages. Welcome. Was that good?
Yeah, that was brilliant. Wow. I am fascinated to meet this woman in your intro.
That's why I love asking people that, because people's best friends say such awesome things about them that I'm always like, wow, like we should all get our friends to be writing stuff, right? Like LinkedIn profile, hand it over to your best friend.
I think friends are just nicer to you.
True story. Tell me about what you're most proud of achieving in your professional life.
I think the one thing that I'm most proud of achieving is really becoming a more centered and balanced leader and being able to show up for, the marginalized group or my junior team members who are like rather lost in the inflection point of their career and provide genuine and sometimes perhaps a little bit too straightforward feedback. But really being able to show up for others, like a lot of my mentors and friends that I've met along my career have shown up for me along the years.
I think what was interesting for me was your journey through the pandemic and all the things that were happening in the US with the Black Lives Matter protests and, more Me Too resurgence, etc., that you really did take up that role of trying to be there for other people, leading circles and groups within your workplace, starting conversations, championing people. But that did take its own toll, right? And that is its own form of emotional labor.
Yeah. So I think the one thing that I suppose companies generally don't prepare a lot of, I would say, volunteers for when you do have these type of cross-sectional, multifaceted circle. So I mean, just for context, I've been in two circles. One is just a fairly regular one. I think we talked about our lives, what we did over the weekend, and our career goals, and I was like very vanilla, right? And then I thought, okay, I was ready. I decided to go into a slightly different one, which had obviously a lot of the colleagues were from very different backgrounds, like people, women of color, queer as well, and just all around. And once I was leading that circle, I feel like it was kudos to me, being like the first session, people were willing to open up, but it was intense, right? Like some of the stories and the challenges that all of these women are going through or have been held inside and finally felt like they could actually speak to an audience and let their struggles be seen and be heard. Even talking about it now, I feel a little bit like tearing up a little bit, because it's very difficult not to become very empathetic about it. And that for me, I mean, I would used to walk away from the circle sessions and feel like, wow, I actually haven't really done anything. I just held an hour of forum where people kind of spoke about their problems, but I didn't really, did I really change anything? Like, did I really help? And it brought about a sense of helplessness, that there's so much suffering in the world that is pretty much unseen by most of the world for most of the time. And here I am listening to it people have, like I have they have placed their trust in me. I'm listening to it, but there's not that much I can, immediately that I can do. So I think I remember obviously our conversations about it where I was just like, probably like slightly depressed, I would say. You always helped me at the time. It's like, by providing them with that platform and allowing and really just listening and let them believe that, hey, you're not unseen. You're not unnoticed. I see you. I know you're struggling and I feel your struggle is in some way helping a little bit.
I think context also really matters in that case though as well, right? Because when you were talking about you're someone from the accounting department or the finance department, you've been in financial services, you've worked in a bank, all of those spaces are not really spaces that encourage vulnerability, nor do they encourage people to share anything really of themselves personally. And so I think that's why I consider that an achievement, because there is so much vulnerability that you have to show as a leader in that position for people to think it's safe enough to open up, right? Which is why so many of them in corporate spaces end up being kind of a waste of time, where everyone's just sort of sitting there and going, when is it time for, coffee?
Yeah. I think that probably hit the nail on the head. I remember the first time when I had a real challenge. I think pretty early in my career, it was a conflict with a colleague. One of those, very much. I think it was like a classic scenario of, some sort of male superiority. It felt like, they were entitled to certain things that, even though I was actually doing above what I was required to do, they felt like they were owed more. And yeah. And so what I remember that, when I got that phone call, which was just like, why did you not do your job? And I was like, what do you mean? My job was this. I did this out of the goodness of my heart. So that the next person doesn't have to do this, right? And you feel like this wasn't enough. Anyway, so that was one of those moments where you just feel like I was really wronged. And I remember that. So I think in audit, you have these really lovely planning lady who basically controls your audit life. They can really support you or they can ruin you. So if anyone's listening that's in articles, they're your best friends.
Be nice to the planning person. Yeah, got it.
Yeah, be nice to them. They're really lovely, supportive, women, and they've seen this. They've seen this multiple times. New article clothes come in and out every year. And I remember going to one of them, and she could to talk about something unrelated, and she could see that I was not obviously in my right space of mind. And she asked me what happened. So I told her. And obviously during that, I got emotional. And she was like, go to the restroom. Don't let others see you cry. And that was her advice, right? And I mean, to be fair, in that environment, it was probably a good advice.
Probably, but not the most inspirational, to be honest.
No, it was a practical one, right? Given and you also know that how male dominant my particular department was, in audit. But Asian women cry, just stereotype, they're there for you, can't handle any pressure.
Man.
Because after I cried, I just called the partner on the job and I was like, this is not okay. He does not get to speak to me like this. And you know how hard I work. And I think the partner was in a bad mood that day. So he welcomed the opportunity to basically scream with the other person. And 15 minutes later, I got a phone call of apology.
I mean, that is a pretty big win, to be honest. Especially for a junior person to be able to call a partner and get someone else to actually give you a apology, never mind being a woman and being Asian. That's pretty, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, but I think that just shows, right? It's don't undermine your own influence and your own capability, regardless of your, tenure or experience.
Absolutely. But that's not about your failures. Give me the spice. Tell me about a failure.
So fast forward from that day where I got basically, I suppose, the confirmation that you may not show weakness ever, right?
Yeah.
So fast forward from that day, probably I would say another 5 years later, 4 or 5 years later, 4 or 5 years, I became this, I would say like a stereotypical woman in finance. Very much like, what is emotion? It's a pointless, it has no place in the workplace, especially for women. If you show it, you're going to get eaten. Right. And along comes another junior member of my team. So this was when I already moved to the US. I was consulting for one of the tech firms in the Bay Area. And so this is now a freshly out of article audit young lady from Australia and also Asian, even shorter than me. She thought we were going to be sisters. Like that kind of very outgoing. I'm actually, like, objectively speaking, probably a very like agreeable person, right? I feel like if in other scenarios we may have been friends, but the particular client I'm consulting for obviously has this whole thing about let's accept everyone as who you are, and all of that. And, embrace your true self, and it's fine. It's a safe space. However, that doesn't really apply to consultants. And, it applies to their full-time employees, but like not really consultants, right? It's like you're in a different culture.
Yeah.
And she was basically just like she loved that, right? Like, who doesn't? Like, I would also love to embrace that. I think it's a very good, culture to have. And she was being her true, authentic self, like through and through, which, I think kudos to her. It either takes blind naivety or like an immense amount of courage to do that.
Yeah. And
the other part is the way she was behaving was really not, I would say it was undermining her own credibility with the client.
What was she doing?
There was some, I would say, performance issues, but overall she does needed a lot of guidance. And the only way at that point I knew how to guide and teach a person was from work or from, Asian upbringing, which is, this is wrong. You need to do better. And it is, I would actually sometimes just have these conversations with her, just like, hey, like, look, the client may tell you to your face that, no, it's fine. You still did a good job, but it's partly the American culture exacerbated by the company culture.
Yeah.
Like, you send an email, great job on the email. Like that really is, which I mean, we laugh about it, but I feel like there's something to it. It really does, encourage people to feel better about what they're doing and then strive to do a good job. Yeah. I initially laughed at this whole thing, but I feel like there really is something critical there, being encouraging instead of being, reprimanding. But I think she may have mistaken the general culture as kind of an indication on her performance. And, I was obviously the bearer of bad news because I am responsible for the team of consultants. And she did not like it, to a point where I think she thought that I had it out for her. I think the way I approached it was probably like if I were to approach it now, right, I would have assessed the situation a little bit more, depending, probably tailor more to just her personality and the way she is, and trying to understand where she's coming from, in a sense, instead of just this is what you did wrong and this is what you need to improve, right? And I think throughout my career, and probably a lot of your career too, given your McKinsey background, we get told this is what you're not good at, and it gets magnified, and you just have to this is what you need to improve on. It's not really like focuses on your strength. Like, actually, you also did all of these really well. You should continue to do these and use this to your strength. But it's like your flaws and your shortcomings get blown out of proportion in a sense. And that was basically at that time the coaching technique and the leadership style that was ingrained in me. And this person comes from a very different background, and I think it just crushed her. And my immediate response is, why is this person crying? This is very strange.
Okay.
Whereas now I'll be like, okay, this is really hard for you, to hear feedback about yourself and your own shortcomings. This is a hard moment, and you should be allowed to have your emotions. So, that was probably, I would say, professionally, one of my biggest failures is really not being able to support this very, I would say, green and fresh soul out of audit and help her, support her through her journey, right? It is hard coming to a new country, establishing your life, meeting new people. Just really not showing up for another woman.
Which is a really interesting failure, because so many people talk about women being the worst to each other and how so many women are kind of out to get other women. And it strikes me as you're talking that perhaps we've been framing this in the completely wrong way, because like you, it could be women who were not out to get someone else. They're just out to save themselves in a sense, right?
Yeah, and also to save her, because she was too inexperienced to really realize the to have that self-awareness that sometimes people just saying certain things to be nice. Sometimes people are genuinely praising you for something you've done. And obviously she didn't get to see the legal side of all of these interactions with clients, which is they're not allowed to tell you that you did something wrong. They're actually documented, and a call comes to me.
Yeah. But I do think there is also this expectation on women in particular to be able to give the soft messages. And if you're unable to do that, or you're unwilling to do that, somehow you are the villain.
It is interesting, right? And also, I think the relationship that women have with women at a workplace, because in the end, when she did eventually move on, we had a chat before she left, and she was like, yeah, you told me that I should go out and always find, the market value for my worth. And that is what I did. And now I have those other opportunities. And, I do have you to thank for that. I was like, okay, so you listened to something. Yay. And I'm sorry I made you cry. I try not to make people cry anymore.
Yeah, that's a good goal. Making people cry is not great. How did you fix that particular learned behavior of harshness to be nice?
This is, I wish I could tell you there was a course on LinkedIn that I did, and then magically I knew exactly what to do. This was definitely not one of those. And it was really after, it's after my grandmother's passing, and she was the matriarch of the family, the quintessential strong woman. She had, so she obviously had stage 4 lung cancer, and it was a month before she was basically the last time she was in hospital, in so much pain. She would still make breakfast, dinner, lunch for the entire family, just because she's I have to contribute. As long as I'm breathing, I have to make my existence be worth something. I have to contribute. I have to do these things. And I didn't even think too much of it, but, since her passing, sometimes I would like read about, some of these other stories about, families going through, with family members going through this type of, like terminal disease, and just how much pain they would be in. And I think this is why this podcast, Strong-ish Women, is so important, is that we make our suffering, even like the pain from late stage cancer, seem effortless. And that's just ridiculous. So after she passed, obviously in trying to deal with the enormous amount of grief, because you can actually only keep emotion at bay for so long. They really come back and get you.
Yep.
Emotion is a thing, and it will get you in the end. Ignoring them is not the way. So I went into therapy and really had a hard look at all the aspects of my life and what made me who I am, and how I behave at workplace and in my personal life. And I think the most difficult part about correcting this behavior is that, yes, I'm harsh on others, but I'm even harsher on myself.
Yeah.
So it is really through a lot of hard luck, a lot of tears, that I started to have compassion for myself. And once I was still not very good at it, but I'm starting. But once I was able to start being more compassionate about some of my own shortcomings and failures, I was able to be more compassionate about others. Like even in a work environment, like, yeah, this is a hard situation for you. It might not be a hard situation for me, but what you're going through for you in that moment is difficult. And I'll make space for that. And I think that's the one part, is just like through really a lot of self-awareness and a lot of therapy. And I was fortunate to have two really great women leaders who just kind of flipped my whole idea of what a good female leader should be or would be, or like, like a successful female leader, like what they passed, how they got there, like what that should look like. And I think it's really through them that I've learned that, there are multiple ways to succeed. And no, you don't need to do everything in under a decade. That is
Yeah. I mean, I wish someone had maybe told us this a little bit earlier, though.
I know.
Because I look back at my career and I'm like, okay, I've done a lot, I've achieved a lot, that's great. But it nearly killed me doing that. And I thought I was like speeding through, going to do the things, achieve as fast as possible. Because in my mind, time was running out.
Yeah.
And I only had until, if you told me then that like I had until I was 65 to have a career, I would have been like, I don't know what you're talking about. I only have until 45. If I want to make partner, I need to do that by age, whatever, which means I need to be AP by age, whatever, which means that I need to have kids at this point, which means that I need to make partner, like there was this whole timeline already set out in my mind.
Yeah.
And I'm like, did everybody else know did the older people know this entire time that timeline was nuts?
I feel like the old people that we used to work with probably didn't know, and which is why a lot of them look like they were in their 70s when they were 40, right? And no, not everyone needs to perform at like greatly exceed level. Someone who's just at meet expectations still have a place, and and still can be very efficient in what they do. It really is actually up to the manager and the leadership to really use people's strength instead of focusing on their failures. And I think that's something that, it's really those two great women leaders that actually at Airbnb that showed me that this is a more balanced leadership approach, right? Instead of that on you. Why are you not perfect?
Which honestly contributed to me being a better leader, because that was the advice that you gave me when I was struggling with underperformers on my team. It's like, not everyone has to be a superstar. And that's a good thing, right? People bring different dimensions to the team and they bring different layers to the team.
Yeah.
And different skills to the team. And if you expect everybody to be a Swiss Army knife, you will be disappointed. But a Swiss Army knife cannot do what a spoon can do. So sometimes you want to have a spoon, right? And that's a really valuable lesson for everyone to think about. And why I particularly dislike this whole quiet quitting thing, which, by the way, I don't think it exists. I feel like that's just people doing their job. There should be nothing wrong with just doing your job and having a balanced life outside of your work and not putting your whole self-worth based on your work. That shouldn't be a bad thing. Shouldn't that be what we're striving towards? I don't think there's enough you could pay someone to make up for a life that they've lost.
No,
that's the reality.
It really is no prize for that. And I think that they should differentiate this from, not being proud of the work that you do, because people are still very proud of the work that they produce. Just because, if I'm not going to lose sleep or wait for one mistake I made at work doesn't mean I am not proud to work at a certain company and of the work I produce or the impact that the company has on the world or not have on the world. I don't know.
Yeah. But it's also there's so much privilege also in this concept of quiet quitting, because you're always talking about white collar corporate jobs. You're never talking about working class people when you're talking about quiet quitting, right? It is just assumed that those people cannot do that, or that they're already doing the minimum somehow. And that classism implied in that, I think, is definitely a hypocrisy that people don't think enough about. I came to the point at some point in the pandemic where I really thought, I don't think there's such a thing as low-skilled work. I don't think there's such a thing as low-value work, because it was the people who were driving trucks across the country and farming and stacking supermarket aisles, etc. Those were the people whose work I most valued in the pandemic, because they were the ones that were keeping me safe, in a sense, right?
And fed. Honestly, without them, I don't think we would have survived, right?
1,000%.
It really is an extreme point of just privilege, and a lot of people don't acknowledge that.
So beyond these lessons about privilege, power, and gender in the workplace, what do you tell people you learned from these failures versus what you actually learned from the failures?
So what I do tell people about this is that, yes, there is a place for vulnerability at the workplace. Definitely. That's one of the most important things I've learned. And you don't need to have everyone on your team to be the exact clone of the other person. I do believe that there's a place for different personalities, different levels of competencies, or even different levels of just productivity. There is a place for everyone on the team.
What would you tell someone who's trying to seek a different path, right? Someone who has been raised in that culture of perfection, whether from a cultural or from an organizational cultural perspective. Got any advice?
This might sound like I do have advice for that. And honestly, it's go to therapy. It's great.
Honestly, every time people ask me those sort of things, I say the exact same thing. I'm like, go to therapy. Okay, devil's advocate, you can't go to therapy. Therapy is expensive. What do you do then?
I would recommend do some reading in the space of vulnerability, the thing with vulnerability, though, that it can be a double-edged sword if used incorrectly, in the sense that you really should only open up to people. It's more difficult at work, but in personal life as well, to people who have actually deserved your vulnerability. I think you have to be careful with it. Unfortunately, like you can't just, and by being vulnerable, I mean being intentionally vulnerable, not just like, oh my God, I'm suffering. This is terrible. Get it out there. I barely know you, but now you know my deepest, darkest, like, flaws and secrets. What are you going to do about it? Right? That to me is a little bit like emotional blackmailing, but you really should find the people that deserve your vulnerability. It is more effective, like in terms of helping you learn from that and heal, as well. And yeah, it's more difficult to do at work, especially, like I feel like I'm pretty privileged. Like for the most part of my career now in the US, that I have been in an environment where I feel like there is enough psychological safety, but that is not a default for most people, I think, in the corporate world still. I'm obviously in a bit of an ivory tower here, obviously in the Silicon Valley. And I acknowledge that it is not a easy thing to do. So I would be very careful about it. Yes, should be able to be vulnerable with people at work and in your personal life, but do be selective.
I think that is a very wise way forward. Zhe, thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you for the intro. So beautiful.
What are best friends for?
I know, right?